case in point. There's been a lot of citizen involvement in environmental issues that has led to the creation of multilateral environmental agreements on all sorts of issues, like export of toxic waste, for instance. And there's one very important Chapter 11 case which arose because the Canadian government ruled that against the export of PCBs for treatment, PCBs being a highly toxic chemical that's used in transformers, and when they need to be disposed of, something's got to be done about them. The government passed this regulation so they would have to be treated within Canada, and an American firm started a Chapter 11 case against Canada and won, even though Canada had signed the Basel Convention, which forbade countries to export dangerous chemicals. And so here you have a case of, and so I see this as demobilizing, because the whole effort to get this environmental accord achieved internationally was overthrown by a Chapter 11 case in which a company challenged a Canadian government measure which was complying with the international agreement. So I think it's the impact of these this type of global government is really significant for undermining the whole notion that citizens can be empowered, because the message is that even when they've been successful, they will fail. So what is the good news? Well, a lot of things have happened internationally in global governance arenas that is a result of citizens working. It's primarily citizens in groups, in NGOs. It's not so much citizens going abroad as individuals. But there's also in the field of culture. In fact, it's a consequence of our losing this case on Sports Illustrated, that the cultural groups in the country, that's magazine, Association of Canadian Magazine in particular, but other groups like publishers, had the idea, and it worked through a Toronto lawyer who was a consultant, but they wanted to have some kind of global governance mechanism that could withstand, that could offset the power of this muscular World Trade Organization in order to give countries a legal basis for protecting their culture. Because the message of the WTO is that cultural products are goods, and a magazine is no different from a hammer, and that should be treated at national borders the same as any other manufactured good. Whereas the cultural argument is, well, cultural goods have a different quality because they incorporate values, and if Canadians want to tell stories to each other or read books about their own country or see films about themselves, which films, it's very difficult to see a film about Canadians because we have so little screen space, then there should be a way that the international governance system allows countries to develop their own culture. And in October of 2005, at UNESCO in Paris, a convention was signed and is now in force, which explicitly allows the promotion and protection of national cultures. And that is a result of a big international effort led by the Canadian government of the time, but in cooperation with NGOs in many, many countries. France was a big supporter of this effort, and it did lead to a new kind of global governance that was to offset some of the unfortunate aspects of the WTO. So that's, and maybe I should get Stepan to talk about his profession, because there are international lawyers groups that do wonderful things.
Yeah, I certainly will. I think one of the big lessons of globalization is that participatory politics isn't just about the state. It's not just about participating in the official organs of government. It's about a lot of other things as well. And so there are examples from all different walks of life of citizens or professionals banding together nationally and transnationally to effect change. In the legal profession, of which I'm a member, there are a number of transnational grassroots organizations dedicated to advancing the cause of justice, access to justice, defense for political defendants and journalists and so on, trade unionists around the world who are facing the sort of legal machinery of repressive or at least questionably democratic regimes. There's an organization founded in Belgium in 1992, I think, Avocats Sans Frontières, which works around the world. It has a chapter in Quebec. It's mainly made up of human rights lawyers who help to represent accused people in legal proceedings around the world and to advance human rights, respect for human rights, and so on. There are others. Canada has its own one called CLAIR, the Canadian Lawyers, oh dear, I forget. Anyway, something about international human rights, CLAIHR, which involves lawyers working to advance human rights around the world. Avocats Sans Frontières sounds a lot like another very famous organization, Médecins Sans Frontières, which does similar things in the field of medicine and providing care to people, especially in conflict zones or in relation to natural disasters around the world. Canadians have played very substantial roles there. You all probably know James Orbinski, who is the Canadian former, was he the president or executive director of President of Médecins Sans Frontières, has written a fantastic book about that experience, and Stephen may even want to speak to that because he knows that story better than I do. There are new forms of political participation that have emerged in response to economic globalization. As we mentioned Seattle, you know, the World Economic Forum, where all the richest people in the world and corporate executives get together to decide sort of best policies for the world's future every year. In response to that, the World Social Forum was established first it was Porto Alegre, Brazil in first instance, and it has spread worldwide, which really represents a remarkable sort of experiment in a diverse form of alternative democracy. You've got also governance initiatives like the Forest Stewardship Council. I don't know how many of you have heard of the Forest Stewardship Council. It was founded in Toronto in 1993. Canadians have played significant, not super central roles in the FSC, but the FSC is a fascinating experiment in alternative democracy, so to speak. It arose out of the utter failure of the governments of the world to do something significant about tropical deforestation. When there was no agreement on tropical deforestation coming out of the Rio Summit in 1992, citizens groups and a few forward-looking businesses said, we're going to take it into our own hands. And they created this thing called the Forest Stewardship Council, which is really a fascinating institutional innovation in a number of ways. Among them, a tripartite structure where all decision-making is made in this sort of assembly that has a social chamber, an environmental chamber, and an economic chamber, each chamber having equal weight when it comes to votes, and each chamber being divided into sub-chambers